بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم عبده ورسوله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Jazakallah khair to the masjid for having us here, to all of you for attending. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for bringing us together to discuss this very important topic and this very important subject. So we did this last year. I can't remember, my memory is failing me, so I can't remember who was here last year and who wasn't. Alhamdulillah, it was a very good session. So typically what happens is we'll try and speak for around no more than 30-40 minutes and then try and give a lot of opportunity for questions, because what we usually find with the zakah seminars, and I've done a lot of zakah seminars and workshops, there is always loads and loads of questions. So try and give inshallah lots of time for questions. With you, inshallah, you hopefully have a copy of this guide. Hopefully it will act as a good tool for you to, we have some brother here handing them out, so if you don't have one and you'd like to get a copy, feel free to come and get one. Take it away with you inshallah, and hopefully it will act as a good reminder for anything that you may forget or anything, information that will be useful for you. The idea of this guide is to provide you with a step-by-step calculation help when it comes to zakah. Okay, so very briefly we'll begin with considering the significance of zakah. And to do that, the first thing we can ask ourselves is, what is the meaning of the word zakah? What is the linguistic or literal meaning of the word zakah? Does anybody know? Yes, brother. Say again? Oh, poor due, okay, the poor tax. So this is what zakah is, but it's not the linguistic meaning of the word.
Purification?
Yeah, purification, that's one meaning, the most common and obvious meaning of the word zakah. So I'm talking about the literal meaning or the linguistic meaning. Like with salah, salah means the prayer, right, the established prayer. But the linguistic meaning of salah is what? The linguistic meaning of salah is connection, right, it's connection. That's what the linguistic meaning is. Okay, if you just translate the word literally in Arabic. So the word zakah literally in Arabic means purification. There are also other meanings actually. What other meanings does zakah have? Anyone know? Anybody? No? Okay, so zakah, another meanings of the word zakah, which most people they don't consider, is also growth and development and also blessing as well. So this is really important because the scholars mention that zakah is both of these things. It is both a means of purification, so it's a means of purification of our self, our nafs, as well as a means of purification for our wealth. So the word zakah, as we mentioned, purification, growth, development, blessing. In fact, the word zakah in the Quran appears how many times? Does anybody know? Yes. Okay, 28, almost. That's not actually, that's not, maybe brother, hopefully you can double check that one. Okay, what it says, 28 times in conjunction with the word salah. The word itself appears 32 times. Zakah appears 32 times in the Quran. Okay, 28 times in conjunction with the salah. So what we find with the zakah is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about zakah in the Quran, He more often than not mentions it in conjunction with salah. For example, at the beginning of Surah Al-Mu'minun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. The successful indeed are the believers, those who have humility in their prayer, and they turn away from idle and false talk, and they give their zakah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often talks about الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ, those who establish prayer and pay zakah. And in His command, He says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ, establish the prayer and give zakah. And this differs from fasting and hajj. Fasting and hajj, obviously the other two pillars, they are mentioned much less frequently, but in much more depth, much more length. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about fasting, for example, Surah Al-Baqarah, 1.5 pages is dedicated to verses and topics related to fasting. In Hajj, in a few different places mentioned, it's a few verses at a time that I mentioned. But the oft repeated command is salah and zakah, salah and zakah. Okay, prayer and charity. And not only in the context of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, but also in the context of previous prophets as well. So many places in the Quran, you see previous prophets talking about salah and zakah. And even though the rulings of salah and zakah at their time was different to the rulings of salah and zakah for us, the fact is the concept of prayer and the concept of some obligatory giving or charity was there even with previous prophets as well. So these are, if you like, the most essential components of worship of human beings since the beginning until now. And so, a recap then on the significance of zakah. When we pay zakah, we purify, as we said, our soul from miserliness and greed. It forces us in an obligatory fashion to make sure that some of our wealth, is set aside and given to those who are eligible to receive zakah. It purifies the wealth itself. Someone might say, well, maybe I have a halal job, my wealth doesn't need purification. But even so, somebody, even if they have a halal job, maybe there are some doubts in that wealth. Maybe a business person, he has a halal job, but sometimes in some of his dealings it was a little bit, not 100% on point. So there's a purification in that sense. Sometimes if we are a salaried employee, is it always the case that we do give exactly the due haqq and the due right of the employment that we have, that we deserve every penny that as per the contract? Maybe sometimes we fall short. Okay, we gave some less time here, etc., etc. So this is a way of purifying the wealth in that sense as well. And as we said, that this when we give zakah, it is like we are removing zakah. The scholars mention is like the filth or the impurity in the wealth, meaning that when we move that aside from our wealth, then what we do is we give rise to the blessing and the potential for growth and barakah in whatever is left over. In whatever is left over. So the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari that unpaid zakah is not left intermingled with any form of wealth or somebody's wealth, except that it causes rot and destruction within it. Right? So if somebody has wealth and they are not paying the zakah on that wealth, then it's considered to be the case that now the rest of it will also lose blessing and barakah as well. So inshallah, hopefully this is clear. I'm not going to go too much into more detail on this topic. I want to get straight into the calculation aspects of zakah, as I said, so it will give us an opportunity to address those issues and look at any questions. So I'm going to briefly go through this guide with a bit of additional explanation, and then inshallah, if there's any questions, we can go through them. So the first thing to understand, the main thing to understand about zakah when we're looking at the calculation of zakah is that the overall process. What is the overall process? There are certain assets, that are subject to zakah, and then there is the so we add all of these up, we add the value of all of these up together, and then there are certain liabilities or debts that we may be able to deduct from our assets, right? So let's say, for example, somebody has £5,000 of zakatable assets, a mixture of different things, and it adds up to 5,000. Then they have certain liabilities or debts or overdue payments, which we'll discuss in detail. Maybe that is £2,000 worth. So now the person will take 5,000, they will subtract 2,000, they have 3,000 left. Now you compare the net figure to the nisab. What is the nisab? The nisab is the threshold above which someone needs to pay zakah. So if this net figure that you come out with is below the nisab, then you do not pay zakah. If it is above the nisab, then you pay zakah on the entire figure, the entire amount. So very quickly on the nisab itself, what is the nisab? The nisab, the Prophet ﷺ in various ahadith set the nisab in terms of gold and in terms of silver. In terms of gold and in terms of silver. And so he gave a certain measure of gold and a certain measure of silver. At that time, gold and silver was like effectively cash for us today. That was currency, that was the way trade and exchange was done, right? And at that time, the measures of gold and silver that he gave were roughly, in that time, equivalent in value to each other. But what has happened now is that obviously with our monetary system, which has become delinked from these real assets, real value commodities, if you like, there's become a big difference in terms of the gold nisab and the silver nisab. So today, approximately, if you equate the measure that the Prophet ﷺ gave of the gold nisab today in pound terms, it's approximately £2,150. And if you do it in silver terms, it's a very low figure. It's just above £200, around £215. So now the question becomes, so now what happens? Well, like if I'm in between the two of them, what should I do? So then the scholars recommend that, and on some of these issues there are differences of opinion, of course, but the opinion that we go with the National Zakat Foundation, this guide is based on, is the view of the Al-Qalam Sharia panel, has a mix of scholars on it from around the country. So the opinion is that if you have only gold, if somebody has only gold, then they should use the gold nisab. And this is you might think, that has to be an uncommon situation, but actually it might be more common than you think. Gold, especially in a lot of our cultures, is like this prized possession that remains protected and saved, and doesn't matter, the whole world can fall apart, but the gold will stay, right, in a box locked up in the attic. That is how we perceive of it, right? So there's many situations which we have come across as well, when people get in touch and they say, you know, I only have one bank account, it's an overdraft, so I have no cash as such, I have no cash, but I have gold, so I have £1,000 of overdraft, let's say, but I've got £20,000 of gold. So what do I do? So now this person still pays zakah, but they pay zakah, they have £20,000 of gold, right? That is their only asset. They have no cash in effect. So now they will compare this to the gold nisab, £2,100, we said, and then now because the value of their gold is above the nisab, they will pay zakah on the entire amount. How do they pay it? Well, they have to sell some gold to pay the zakah that they owe. Okay. Then they say, if you have a mix of assets, you have some cash, you have some silver, you have some gold, you have some business assets, etc., etc. Now you should use the silver nisab. You use the silver nisab across, which will apply to most of us. So in effect, we should use the silver nisab when we are looking at our zakah. The benefit of that, of course, for the payer is that it is safer. If you have £1,000, i.e. in between the two nisabs, then better to pay zakah, £25, and you feel secure you have paid, and also it's more beneficial for the recipients. More zakah will be paid, therefore more will be distributed and received by those who are eligible to receive. Okay, one thing actually which I mentioned important, which is one of the most common questions that is asked, that what does it mean, the issue of having money for a year? You know, we always hear with regards to zakah that you have to have money for a year, or your assets for a year to pay zakah. What does that mean? Okay, this is the concept of the hawl. Okay, the hawl refers to with passage of 1 lunar year. So this is technically, right, how you determine when to pay zakah. In theory, this is what is supposed to happen. That you have your wealth, okay? And the first time in your life that your wealth ever exceeded the nisab, then your clock starts ticking. Right? The first time that your wealth ever exceeds the nisab, your clock starts ticking. And then 1 lunar year from that date, your first zakah becomes due. Right? So on that day, you make your calculation, and then if you're above the nisab on that day, you pay zakat on your situation on that day. Okay, so let's take an example. Let's say last year on the 1st of Ramadan was the first time, okay, up until then you had no money, or you were in debt and you had didn't have to pay zakat. All of a sudden on the 1st of Ramadan last year, you received inheritance, right? £500,000. You paid off all your debts, now you've got a nice amount of cash in your account. Okay, you're clearly above the nisab. Do you have to pay zakah then and there? No, you don't have to pay zakah then and there. Now your clock has started ticking though, because now you've come above the nisab. So 1 lunar year after that, so 1st of Ramadan this year, which is just about coming up now, on that day, the person will look at their situation on that day. What is my situation today? Then my first zakah is due. I make my calculation. Am I above the nisab? Yes, I am. Now I pay my zakah. Right? In between, you ignore everything that happens in between, except for in one scenario. Okay? And that one scenario is that your wealth goes below zero again. Okay? So if your wealth fluctuates around the nisab, right? Let's say somebody receives £2,000 a month in salary, and they have, just under £2,000 of cost each month with their rent and bills and all the rest of it, right? So they're constantly fluctuating. They get £2,000 in at the beginning of the month. By the end of the month, they're down to £10 again. Then back up when the salary comes in, 2,000, then back down to £10 again, etc., etc., etc. So they're constantly fluctuating throughout the above and below, above and below, above and below. Then they ignore all of that. Don't forget all of that. Just live your life as normal. Now you come to your date has come. Okay, now on that day you make your calculation. What do I have today? Okay, I have £500 today. Okay, I take 2.5% of 500, which is £12.50. And I pay £12.50 of zakah, and then I'm done. Right? If in between you come below zero, then the clock stops. And then when you come above the nisab again, your clock restarts, and then another year after that, your first zakah becomes due. Does that make sense? Yeah? So so this is the easiest, most practical way of considering it. So if you were to plot a chart of your wealth over the course of the year, of course, for all of us, our wealth goes up and down. We're buying things, we're earning money from all sorts. Money's coming from here and there. Money's going out all over the place. Typically, it always feels as if more is going out than what's coming in. Right? That's how it feels. But that's it. Whatever. Your life is going on. So really, the way to think about it is throughout the year, you don't need to think about your zakah, basically. Right? But what is very important, very, very important, is that everybody has a zakah date and a zakah anniversary. That for them, they always pay their zakah. Now, as we said, technically, theoretically, that should be the first time you ever came above the nisab. If I ask you randomly in this room, who knows the first time their wealth ever came above the nisab, that very first time, most people will not know. They won't know. So then the scholars say, okay, you should try to make the best estimate of that. Because zakah is not by default payable in Ramadan. It's not the Ramadan charity. Okay, it's only become the Ramadan charity because that's how we have decided to make it. But that was never ever the case. It's never ever the case. The theory of zakah is exactly what I've explained, and that could happen at any time. So someone's zakah date could be at any point in the year, right? So if, however, we do this, and we don't know, we have no idea, we don't even know how, we don't have the records, we can't find out when that first time was. Okay, now you can arbitrarily select a date. That's when people then start to say, okay, now I want to do it in Ramadan, it's more reward, it's easier to remember, all the rest of it. But now still, in Ramadan, select a specific date for yourself. Are you going to calculate your zakah with respect to your situation, the 1st of Ramadan, the 10th of Ramadan, the 27th of Ramadan, whatever it is, but you should have a specific date and then stick to that every year. It's very important. Why? Because someone's situation can change drastically within a month. Oftentimes we get questions around somebody is just about to buy a house. So they've saved a deposit amount or a cash amount to purchase a property, right? And that transaction is just going through over the course of Ramadan. So maybe at the beginning of Ramadan they have their money. At the end of Ramadan, they don't have their money anymore, right? So if you don't have a specific zakat date by which you are going to make your calculation, you can't just leave it to your own sort of decision making on that particular year. Well, I'll pay my zakat towards the end. By the time the deposit will have been paid, therefore I won't have that cash left. I won't have to pay zakat on that money. Do you understand? So it's very important to have a specific date, and whatever your situation is on that day, then you pay your zakat according to your situation on that day. Okay, so inshallah, hopefully that's clear. Now you come to your day, right? So let's say your day is 1st of Ramadan. Okay, on the 1st of Ramadan, what do? You sit down and you look at this. You take this guide out, obviously, right? And you look at each part. So first thing says cash. Okay, cash and liquid investments. Liquid investments just means like deposits of cash investments, basically. So the cash you take into account, cash in your savings account, cash in your wallet, cash in under your mattress, wherever your cash is, you include it all. Okay, include all of your cash. And a common question that comes, what about I'm saving for this, I'm saving for that, I'm saving to go on Hajj, I'm saving for my kids' education, I've saved whatever. Yeah, savings, is all subject to zakah, right? And just because you're saving for Hajj, it doesn't matter. That money is included. Whatever you're saving for is included, right? So any money that you have is subject to zakah. So you include that in your cash balance. Then you look at your gold and silver. So gold and silver, the two opinions around gold and silver. Okay, the Hanafi opinion around gold and silver is that all gold and silver is intrinsically subject to zakah, regardless of what format it is in, regardless of whether you use it or you don't use it, right? So a woman has a gold necklace, she pays zakah. A man has, for whatever reason, a gold bar, right, in his attic as a store of wealth, he pays zakah on it. Okay, you have these like biscuits things you can get, like in the Middle East, they have these literally these, how we have these machines for just like cans of drink and crisps and whatnot. Some hotels in the Middle East, they have a thing you put some money in, you can take out a gold biscuit. Bizarre, but that's right. But whatever form it is in, right? This is all subject to zakat, the Hanafi opinion. Okay, all the other madhahib, they say that if the item is used, then it is not subject to zakat. Okay, because one basic principle is that items of personal use are not subject to zakat. Right, so my car, my clothes, my house, okay, my furnishings within my house, etc., etc. All of that is not subject to zakat. So they said a gold necklace for a lady, for example, is like her handbag, or like her clothing, or like her car. They said no, that's not subject to zakat because it's like a use of personal items. It's not like a store of wealth. Whereas the Hanafi madhab said no, intrinsically gold is subject to zakat, doesn't matter what format. And obviously this is the safer opinion to take, and the opinion that most of us follow, that all gold and silver, we typically weigh it or we value it, right, and we pay zakat. Now in terms of valuing the gold and silver jewelry, the most accurate, the best way to do this is to go to your jeweler, okay, take your gold, and the jeweler will tell you this is how much this is worth, okay, and then that is, because they should within that, the gold value, they will adjust for stones like non-gold items within your jewelry, diamonds, all of that stuff. None of that stuff is subject to zakat, diamonds, platinum, everything outside of gold and silver, right? So they will give you the gold value of your jewelry or the silver value is X, whatever that value is. That is a value that you should then use, okay? And that value will typically be less than the, if you like, the live gold price. Typically what people do normal practice is that somebody takes their gold jewelry, they weigh it, maybe at home for example, or even at the jeweler or whatever, okay, they get the grams, the number of grams, and then they multiply that through by the current gold price, which at the moment is something like £28 a gram or something like this, right? And the reality of that figure is that that is, if you like, the kind of the maximum possible value of your jewelry, but it's not actually the real value of your jewelry. The jeweler, for example, if they were to purchase it off you, which if somebody was to sell their gold, typically they'll go to a jeweler to sell their gold, right? The jeweler's never going to give you that. They're never going to give you the maximum, that figure. They're going to give you like 80% of that or 70% of that, whatever. So what I'm trying to say is that you can value your jewelry where the jeweler values your jewelry, if you understand, right? You don't have to value it at a level which you would never ever see for that gold if you were to sell it, for example. Okay, obviously if you do, then you're covering yourself, you will be above, over and above what you have to pay, but from a fair, objective perspective, that is what you should do. Hopefully that's clear. Again, if there's questions, inshallah we can take it later. Okay, now we look at other types of assets, shares, property, pension, and all these kinds of things. So what we'll explain first is the topic of business assets. Okay, a person has a business. Yeah, on the high street here, some Muslim, businessman or shop owner has a business where he's selling clothes, for example. On the day that he has to pay his zakah, all of the clothes that are there for sale are all subject to zakah. Right? All of the clothes that he is selling are subject to zakah. So anything that someone buys with the intention of selling on, i.e. the stock or goods for sale, are subject to zakah at the price at which the person intends to sell them for. Okay? So literally it would be as simple as, or as complicated as, but the process would be as simple as, I have 100 pieces of clothing, okay, the total value of the clothing is £5,000 for example, okay, £5,000 goes into my asset column for calculating my zakah. So if that's the value of the stock, that's the value of the stock, plus obviously cash in the business, any raw materials or inventory that leads to or is part of the final product that is being sold. So what does that mean? It means that, for example, if this person, this businessman, both sews the clothes, right, and sews the clothes that he sells. Yeah. So in the back of the shop, right, he's got somebody working there, and they've bought all the thread and the material, whatever it is. They've got material right in the back. And they've got thread and everything else. All of these items that will eventually end up in clothing that will be sold are also all subject to zakat as well. Okay, because they are all part of the inventory that is effectively going to become a final product for sale. So in a car factory, for example, okay, or let's say a car, let's say a second-hand car salesman, is an easy example. So on the forecourt, you'll see all the cars for sale. They're all subject to zakat. The price tag is right there in the window, so it's very easy to know what the value should be using. Now in the back, they might have these sort of bust-up cars that they're trying to work on. They've got a pile of tires, right? They've got some paints over here. All of these things are subject to zakat. And how do you value those? You value all of them at the price that you would accept to sell them at. If somebody was to come and say, I want to buy these tires off you, how much would you sell them for? If somebody was to say, I want to buy for the material or the clothes, the seller, that somebody came and said, I want to buy all this material off you, right, as material, how much would you sell that material for? So in effect, there is, if you like, an estimation here. Yeah, the business person is supposed to make a fair estimate, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows their intention and their honesty in that, so no one can really impose that in any way, right? They make a fair estimate of the value of all of these things. They include them all, okay, on the asset column of their zakat calculation. All right. Once you understand this point, okay, that business assets are subject to zakat and the owners of the business are liable to pay the zakat, then we can look at the issue of shares. Okay, because what are shares? Shares are simply portions of ownership in businesses. That's what a share is. If I own shares in Microsoft, or shares in BP, or shares in whatever company out there, right? And regardless of the halal and haram of shares, we're not here to discuss this directly in that way, but somebody owns shares in these companies. The point is, in these companies, they can be Muslim companies or non-Muslim companies, it doesn't matter. The point is, in those companies, there are assets subject to zakat. According to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are subject to zakat. Whether people pay those zakat on it or not is a separate matter. So now if I'm a shareholder of one of these companies, I should at least pay the zakah that is in line with my proportion of ownership. So even if I own a very, very, very small percentage of a very, very, very big company, I should still pay my proportionate zakat in line with my ownership. So whether I'm 100% owner of a high street shop or a 0.01% owner of a humongous multi-billion pound company, still I should pay my proportionate zakat based on the business assets within the company. And so in that particular case, in practical terms, okay, if one owns shares in one company, then you would literally take the balance sheet of that company, which is typically available. You would look at it and make a rough estimate based on what you can see of the rough estimate. And this is doable, something we can also help with at National Zakat Foundation. We help sometimes with this, okay, where you make a rough estimate of what the zakat of assets would be. Okay, you look at what your percentage ownership is in that company. You take that percentage and you say, okay, right, I'm going to add this into my zakat column. We can again, we look at that inshallah by way of questions later. Now this applies if you are just holding these shares. So you are holding shares for the long term, this is the principle that you apply. If you have bought shares with the intention of more of a trading angle or a trading intention, right, then the zakat is due on the entire value of the shares. So let me just try to summarize this. Let's say, for example, I buy £10,000 worth of shares. Okay, and I bought them because I think something's going to happen in the next few months, and inshallah this company is going to do really well, and then I'm going to sell them in 6 months' time for £15,000. Let's say that's my intention, right? So now, if my zakat date comes in between, so now you come to, let's say, the 1st of Ramadan, because that's your zakat date. On the 1st of Ramadan, you will simply look at the entire current value of those shares. Whether it's gone up or down doesn't matter. You take the entire current value of the shares and you'll include the entire value, okay, in your zakat, in your asset side column, okay? But if you bought those £10,000 worth of shares and you had no intention to sell them, you were just sitting on them, you've got no intention, you're going to sit there, like you've got no intention, you're not even thinking about them, you're just going to get, maybe it'll pay you some dividend income, whatever, then in that scenario, then your 1st of Ramadan comes, then you apply the other principle that I spoke about, which is now you need to look at the underlying assets of the company and all of that, and then consider, what do I own of this company? Okay, there's two different scenarios, because in the first scenario, the entire thing becomes like a trading asset. Yeah, I bought these clothes to sell them, I bought these cars to sell them, I bought these shares to sell them, in that way, as a trader. Right, so then the entire thing becomes subject to zakat. Now if you don't have a trading intention, you're just holding it, right, you're holding it, then because underlying it is intrinsically there's something subject to zakat there, you pay on your business assets. It's exactly the same thing when it comes to property. Right? If I buy a property like a developer with the intention to sell, the entire property becomes subject to zakat. So I buy a flat for 100,000. I spend 20,000. I want to spend 20,000 on it, just doing it up, getting it painted, fixing it up. Now I want to sell the whole thing for 150,000. In the middle somewhere, my zakat date comes up. Then what do? I value the property as it is today. So maybe I bought it at 100. I plan to sell it for 150. Today I think, okay, it's worth around 130 as it is right now. Then I include 130,000 in my column. But if I buy a property, I have no intention to sell it, I'm just holding, it's just sitting there. It could be my second house in the country, right, where I just turn up every 1 month, every year for a month, for example. Or I'm just renting it out to somebody, or whatever, or nothing's happening. So even just sitting there, derelict as a house, right, and I've got no intention with it, okay, then the property itself is not subject to zakat, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say anywhere that houses are subject to zakat per se. Do you understand? Right? So they're not subject to zakat, but obviously if you're getting rental income from that property and then your zakat date comes, any cash that you've generated from that property, then you will obviously add that in your cash balance, which you should have done already when you're looking at your cash amount. So hopefully that's again clear, inshallah. Pension, I will address if anyone wants to address pension in the questions. We'll come, so because it's a long discussion. So if anyone wants to bring it up later, we can bring it up, inshallah. The only other thing then, in terms of an asset perspective, is starting to now talk about the issue of debts, and then that will bring us on to the next part about what you can deduct. So when it comes to debts, if you have lent somebody money and you have a fair expectation that they will pay you back, then you should pay zakat on that money, not the person you gave the money to, right? So if you've lent your friend £1,000, and as far as you can tell, they're still good to return it within the agreed time frame, or at some point. Typically, many people, they say, here's £1,000, between friends and family. Whenever you're ready, you pay me back. Whenever you're ready, pay me back. So they don't have a fixed time frame. But every zakat date, every year when their zakat date comes up, the lender pays the money, the zakat on the £1,000. The lender pays, even if they don't have the £1,000 with them. But it is their money, it's just owed to them, right? So this is similar actually, which I didn't mention, but similar, for example, you know, with businesses, sometimes when they sell items or services and they have invoices outstanding due to them, right? So it's in those situations as well, a business person would include the value of invoice money due to the company in their zakah balance, because this is cash which is they're waiting to realize, okay, or the cash which is waiting to come into the business. So they'll include that in their asset, in the asset column. So so money that is owed to you, okay, you include, unless the person has disappeared. There's no longer returning your calls. Okay, you have no expectation that you're ever going to get this money back. Now you can write it off. Now it's no longer for you to pay. Okay, which then brings us to the next part, which is around liabilities. So now if we take the other person's situation, the person who borrowed the money, okay, can deduct the amount that they owe to somebody from their calculation. So now let's say this person, they have made their overall calculation, they've looked at their cash, they looked at all their assets as we've talked about. Now they're looking at their liabilities. The person who's borrowed the money, they can deduct that amount from their assets before they look at their total figure and compare that to the nisab. But in terms of debts, there's a few different scenarios, right? There's different types of debts. So there's this type of debt which we've just described. Okay, a personal debt, personal loan between friends or family. Typically in our context would not come with any contract, would not come with any legal sort of binding sort of obligations or anything. It's just loans between friends, for example. So in this situation, in theory, even if one the brother, for example, who lends the money, even if he says to the other person, whenever you're ready, pay me back. In theory, tomorrow, if he needs the money, he can go back and say, look, I really need this money now, you should pay me back. Which is why, in theory, the person who owes the money can deduct that from their balance, right? Because at any point in time, the person who lent them the money can come and claim it, and it's not their money, okay? However, there are also different types of debt. So people ask about, for example, student loans, ask about mortgages, ask about other long-term kind of, finance and debts that are taken. Again, keeping aside the halal and haram for a second, okay? If somebody's in this situation where they have a long-term debt, what do they do? So, now in a way this is a different kind of debt. Why is it a different kind of debt? Because let's say somebody has a mortgage, for example. The bank can't come and say to you, today we want you to pay all of the £150,000 that you owe us. Yeah? You have an agreed plan with the bank, or every month I'll pay such and such over a set time frame. I mean, they can't come and do that unless there's issues of default and all the rest of it, then it's a separate process. But in the normal course of things, they can't come and do that. So what all the scholars are typically agreed on is that you cannot deduct the entire amount of mortgage debt from your zakat calculation, right? And then there is some difference about what you can do. So then some say that they can give an allowance to the person, okay, who is in debt of this nature, any long-term type of debt, to deduct the next 12 months worth of payments, okay, from their asset balance, okay, to help them because they are in debt or they owe money in this way, right? So they say you can deduct up to the next 12 months worth of payments from your assets before you calculate your zakah. However, if you look at this particular scenario, one should only really do this, okay, if one feels that by not doing so, you jeopardize your ability to repay debt. Yeah. The reason this is given is as by way of help to the person in debt. In Islam, of course, a lot of support, if you like, or a lot of ease is given to the person who is in debt, such that even one of the zakah recipients, categories of zakah recipients, are those who are in debt, right? So there is that perspective. However, let's consider a scenario. Consider a scenario where somebody has £10,000 on their first of Ramadan, right, when they pay their zakah, for example. And let's say they're paying £1,000 a month in a debt, or let's say mortgage, for example. So now today I have £10,000, and over the next year I will pay £12,000, right, to the bank. So I have two possibilities. Either I say, okay, I'm just going to pay £250 of zakah on £10,000, or I can do 10,000, take away 12,000, and be minus 2,000, and then pay nothing, right? But the question is that by paying £250 of zakah today, am I actually jeopardizing my ability to pay, to repay my debts for the next year? Is that really making a big, a significant impact in my ability to repay? If it is not, which typically it would not, because it's only 2.5%, then really one shouldn't really consider those debts that are those long-term debts, which is different from, for example, a credit card debt which is overdue, okay, or any liability which is overdue. So if on the 1st of Ramadan, your zakat day, you have a red reminder for your EDF energy bill, right? You've got another red reminder for your some mobile phone bill, or whatever it might be. Any overdue payments, these are deductible. Yeah, these are overdue payments. Or, for example, you even have an overdue payment to, a bank for your mortgage, for example. Okay, then that payment is deductible. Okay, because it's due or overdue, right? Even if somebody has their rent due to the landlord and they've delayed for a little bit, they haven't paid on time, okay, and they've asked the landlord to give them another couple of weeks, for example. Okay, now on their zakat date, that rent is due or overdue. They can deduct that as well. Okay, these are valid deductions because they apply here and now. Like here and now, I owe this money, therefore I can deduct it. But looking to the future, one should really, ideally, not consider then the future. And one of the wisdoms about that is this, or to think about it, a way to help us think about it logically, is that zakah is, remember what we said right at the beginning, that your zakah year, okay, when the first time you come above the nisab, then your year starts, and then your zakah is paid for the first time at the end of that year. So zakah is like a year-end clear-up, yeah? So you live your life for one lunar year, okay, or for the Islamic year, and then your zakah year comes to an end. Now I make a zakah payment on whatever my situation is after this year has expired, right? And then it's as if you pay your zakah, you purify your wealth, and now your new year starts, okay? So all of your payments, obviously, that you're going to make over the next 12 months, those will reflect in next year. Next year, the fact that you've made your mortgage payments, you've paid these debts off, you've paid whatever you paid off, obviously your cash position next year will reflect the fact you've paid all that. Now you're left over with whatever you're left over next year. Now you pay your zakat on that as well. So that's how to think about debts. And obviously business liabilities are the same. So in a business, if a business has liabilities and debts, similar treatment to exactly how we said on the personal, for the personal loan. So anything that is due or overdue, you can deduct. Anything that is kind of long term, better not to deduct anything, but if you have to, then scholars give an allowance for up to 1 year's worth of repayments to be deducted. Okay, so now you take those two scenarios, take your assets, take your liabilities, obviously you do a net figure, so I have 10,000 for example of assets, 5,000 of liabilities that are deductible, take one from the other, 5,000, compare 5,000 to the nisab. If I've got a mix of assets, I compare to the silver nisab, which is just over £200, as we mentioned. 5,000 is clearly above 200, so I pay 2.5% of 5,000, which is £125. Okay, I've got used to doing the sums now. Huh? Just divide by 40, right? So that's what it is, and then £125. Now you pay your zakah, and then you're done basically. So that in a sense covers the essentials of the calculation process. Inshallah, before we open up for questions, there's a couple of things I want to mention. One is in terms of the distribution of zakah. So very, very quickly, how many categories of recipients are there for distribution? Anybody? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran how many categories of distribution for zakah?
7.
8, yes, 8, correct. Which again they're listed in your booklet. 8 categories of distribution. Okay, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب الغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل. Okay, these are the 8 categories. Again, won't go into full detail about it. You can read more in the book, but it gives an idea of us to us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions 8 categories. Faqir and miskin, the poor and the destitute, are only the first 2 of 8 categories, which gives us an indication of what the zakah is a system, an institution within Islam, okay, that has very wide significance. Very wide significance. It's not simply just about poverty alleviation, okay, which is the main principal purpose of zakah, but there's a big, a wider and deeper and more significant purpose to zakah, and it's something that obviously you can have a look at and read more about, inshallah. Very quickly, before we finish, the last thing I'll mention is just about the National Zakat Foundation itself. So National Zakat Foundation, for whom I'm a part of the organization, National Zakat Foundation is a charity, registered charity, that what our purpose is to institutionalize zakah within the UK. What does that mean? It means just like you have a mosque for salah, okay, we have NZF for zakah. That's how we see it, right? It means that anything and everything to do with zakah we try and deal with. Okay, so for zakah payers, we have education service, calculation service, etc., to help all zakah payers in the country Okay, calculate and pay the zakah accurately. Understand, calculate and pay accurately. Okay, this is what this thing is part of, right? That process for us. And so we've done many seminars, workshops on our website. If you go, you'll see many like videos, FAQs, like things to help you understand and calculate zakah properly and appropriately. And our aim here is really for all Muslims in the country to pay their zakah. Very simple. Okay, it sounds very simple, but it's more complicated than it sounds, unfortunately, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of miscalculation, a lot of non-payment. Many people are actually completely unaware of the issue of zakah. And many scholars actually that we've obviously met over the years in doing this work, and teachers and imams from around the country, they say this all the time. They also say to so many people, they realize that there's so much ignorance around zakah, that people don't realize things that are subject to zakah. And when you think about the seriousness of zakah, first of all, it being a right of the poor. Secondly, it being something which obviously purifying ourselves and our wealth, an obligation, a pillar of Islam, the punishment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, and the Prophet mentioned in various hadith from the non-payment or underpayment of zakah is very severe, very severe. The wealth itself will come on the Day of Judgment in a form to punish the person who withheld that wealth. So it's very important for us to understand how critical this is, and like our brother said, for us to disseminate information on this as well. People within our own family, our relatives, people that we have some influence over or sway over, we should make sure that people are understanding, calculating, fulfilling this pillar appropriately. So that's what we do on that side. And then we also focus on the collection and distribution of zakah within the UK. That's something that we focus on. So this is a topic which is worthy of quick discussion. The scholars talk about the issue of the distribution of zakah. And in all books of fiqh, you will see that they all mention that the zakah distribution should be prioritized in the area in which zakah is paid or collected. Okay, this was always the default position from the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. Okay, that zakah first and foremost was distributed. Okay, zakah of Makkah was distributed in Makkah, zakah of Medina within Medina, the zakah of Yemen within Yemen, etc., etc., etc. Right? But then, of course, in our situation, we have a situation where within this country there are zakah eligible recipients. How do we determine? The question arises. Okay, how do we determine a zakah eligible recipient? Well, you do it in exactly the same way that you determine a zakah payer. The process that we've just done just now, take assets, take liabilities, do a calculation, compare that to the nisab, right? Is exactly the same process that you do to determine somebody receiving zakah. Now, in our minds, zakah only goes to the absolute starving, the poorest of the poor, the most destitute and needy. And no doubt they are deserving of zakah, obviously, because they fulfill the criteria that I just mentioned. But the point we have to understand is everybody who fulfills that criteria is possibly a recipient of zakah. And the system of zakah is not supposed to take care of only some recipients of zakah. It's supposed to take care of all recipients of zakah. So if in East Ham there are recipients of eligible recipients of zakah, people who actually, according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet and the scholars, are actually eligible to receive zakah, then the question has to become, then who is responsible for meeting their right, and their need? And the answer is, the zakah payers in this area. And similarly, if you widen that to London, or widen that to the UK. So even if you say, for example, so let's do this scenario, right? So you take the assets of somebody, you take their liabilities, you take one against the other, and now they are below the nisab. Okay, there are many thousands of people, even in this country, who when they do that calculation will find themselves not only below the nisab, but below zero as well. Below zero, because by the time they take into consideration their arrears, their overdue payments, their debts, and all the rest of it, they have nothing. They have less than nothing. So this is very important for us to understand that we have a certain duty to meet their needs as zakah payers. But then also we have to consider two other points, okay, which we are more familiar with, which is eligible relatives. Okay, so relatives of ours, so we can't give zakah to our parents or grandparents or children or grandchildren, okay, or a husband can't give zakah to his wife, okay. But outside of that, eligible relatives can be given to. So if they are in need, then they should be given to. And there's a double reward, one of giving charity or zakah, and the other of binding the ties of kinship between family. And then of course there's a situation where Muslims are most in need. And if you look around the world, of course, there's no shortage of scenarios and situations where Muslims are in severe difficulty and severe need. So really I think what we need to do as a community is make a balance. Okay, we need to balance our duties and our priorities and our responsibilities between making sure that we do our bit to fulfill the needs of the recipients who are in our own community, because we will be asked about them as well as doing our bit for Muslims around the world, relatives, etc., who are eligible to receive zakah. So National Zakat Foundation, since 2011, which is when we started, alhamdulillah, we've collected and distributed close to £2.5 million of zakah within the UK, and we've dealt with up to 2,500 individuals, families around the UK, from all across the UK, who are in severe, have been in severe difficulty, severe need. And really, I can tell you, although the purpose of this is not to discuss that in detail, but whatever the worst possible scenario situation you can imagine someone can experience in this country, I mean, we've seen it all. Brother Asif here is he's in charge of our zakat distribution effort. So if you want to talk to him about that afterwards, you can speak with him. But really, we see some very, very tough and difficult situations that are happening despite there being a welfare state, despite there being councils, because this is the first thing everyone says, right? The welfare state will take care of it. Council, how come there's a situation? But sometimes, even if that is the case for somebody, sometimes there's an interim period, a few days, a week, a few weeks, where they're kind of out to dry. Okay, they haven't got that support immediately. So we have to be there as a community. Okay, we have to be there for our brothers and sisters when they need our help. So inshallah, when you do come to paying your zakah, consider this and consider, if you know someone in your locality who's worthy of zakah, then pay for them. If you don't, but you want to do something to contribute to that, then we can obviously do that. And you can go onto our website, inshallah, and you can see more details around that. Jazakallah khair. That's, I think roughly, I've tried to fit in most of the relevant themes and topics. Any questions on zakah? Yes, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. When you work out your zakat, do you straight away give it to them, or you can keep it till Ramadan?
Okay, good question. So the question is, for the benefit of everyone anyone didn't hear, is that when you calculate your zakah, do you need to pay it immediately, or do you need to, or can you wait until you give it, right? So the default position is, or the initial position is, as soon as you can distribute it, you should distribute it. So if you can pay it immediately, you should pay it immediately. And many people, of course, especially now the younger generations, we typically go online, right, and make a payment to a charity, this charity, that charity, or we call up a number of a charity and we make a payment, right? Then at that point, you've made your payment, then it's up to the charity to make sure they administer the zakah appropriately, right? But even with charities, no charity, the day you pay the zakah, is administering the zakah that day. We have sometimes in our mind as if that's kind of going to be the case. Of course, it's not the case. Practically, that's impossible. So what a policy that any charity that is administering zakah, or even any individual, if there is a reason to do so, should say that it's all the zakah should be administered within the next lunar year. Within the next lunar year, the zakah should be administered at the very latest. So for charities typically do that. So with us, for example, what we do is at the end of Ramadan, whatever zakah figure we have with us, we divide that through by 12 months, and we consider that to be our budget for the next 12 months for distribution. So when applications come through, referrals come through, we're dealing with scenarios, situations, we know that this is our budget, and we distribute to zakah recipients throughout the year until we come to the next Ramadan, and then again the situation continues. If you're an individual, and let's say for example, as I said, you should pay immediately. If you have a valid reason to delay, for example, you want to give zakat by hand to your eligible relatives back home, and you know that in 4 months you're traveling there, for example, right? And you want to go and do it in your hand. You can do that, that's fine. But what you should do is separate the money. So take the zakah money, on the zakah date, separate it, the next day you made your calculation, go and draw the cash, put it in an envelope, put it in the drawer wherever is safe, okay? And then, so you're keeping it outside of your day to day, because you don't know, in 3 months time something might happen, suddenly your money's gone, and you think, oh, now I've got overdue zakah, it's up there, so keep that safe, keep it secure, keep it separate. Then when the time comes, go to wherever you're going to abroad, and then you go and give it. But you shouldn't obviously delay unnecessarily. Yes, ma'am.
So another point, someone landlord has a house, is renting it.
Yeah.
Is getting money every week,
yeah.
But at the end of the year, he got nothing because he used that money.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the question was that if a landlord has many properties receiving rental income on whatever frequency, but then when the end of the year came, or when the zakah date came, for example, he had no money left because he spent it all, then he spent it all. So this is the thing, somebody who has let's say somebody has a massive salary, right, they have huge income for whatever, but when the time the zakah comes, but they spend as well, they spend massive, so they earn £20,000 a month, but they spend £19,999 every month, right? That's what they spend in that way. Then when the time comes for zakah, and if they don't have the cash, they don't have cash that brings them above the nisab, then they're not subject for zakah. So it is theoretically possible that someone who is wealthy in that way, or not wealthy in that way, but they have a high income, okay, it's possible, theoretically possible, they don't have to pay zakah. But obviously, you need to understand that zakah is one part of giving in Islam, right? Zakah is the obligatory, the minimum, okay, that applies to one's wealth at a certain point in time, every year, right? But of course, if somebody's in that situation, then of course they would be encouraged to, they should be giving sadaqah. Okay, they may also be liable for israf. What is israf? Israf means extravagance. Are they going overboard? If they're going overboard, there's also a liability for that. So all of these things will come into account, right? But if somebody, for example, lives a relatively, let's say they're well-to-do, they have a good lifestyle, you go to their house, it's a nice house, they have nice things, they have a nice car, they have a nice this, nice that, all the rest of it. Well, this is also within, we can't say this is forbidden, right? It's obviously halal. Someone does that and they spend their money in that way, then their personal possessions are not subject to zakah. So the fact that the person happened to buy an expensive painting and put it on the wall, well, they are allowed to buy an expensive painting and put it on the wall if they want to, right? And that painting is not subject to zakah. Right? They just had it there, they decided I like a painting. I mean, we all buy things that we like, when we probably don't even need, right? But just because we do that doesn't mean that we now pay zakah on those things. So zakah is basically on what is left over, as we said. You live your life, do what you have to do within reason. All of us should live in a moderation, of course, and try and live within reason. And then when the time comes, then we make our calculation, whatever is left, and then we pay on that. Yes, at the back.
You mentioned pensions.
Oh, okay.
And you said it was complicated. And I can see it because people are contributing,
yeah,
but it's sitting with someone else. And you might get it if you live long, and then it depends on what you get and what you don't get. I don't know if that's too complicated.
No, we can address it briefly. So basically, the debate with pensions is, and similar, there are other similar kinds of investments, is in terms of accessibility. Right, because one of the, in books of fiqh, for example, one of the conditions that the scholars mentioned around wealth that is subject to zakah, they say that the person the zakah payer should have complete control over the wealth. That's what they say. They said you should have complete control. If you don't have complete control, then it's not subject to zakah, right, in general terms. So now when the pension discussion comes up, then the first thing we look at, we think, well, we don't have access to the money, so how can we pay zakah on it? However, it does to some degree depend on the kind of pension it is. So in here we mentioned a few alternatives. Like there are different types of pensions. So for example, there's the final salary scheme. Final salary scheme is when you work for, sometimes I think in the NHS, I think they might be phasing it out, but in the NHS and for certain other professions, okay, they have the final salary scheme pension. What does that mean? It means you might contribute something every month, your employer might contribute something, but ultimately what you receive ultimately in your pension will be some sort of mix, or they do a calculation between whatever has been contributed, how long you've been at the particular place where you're working, and your age when you retire, and what your final salary, what your final salary is when you actually retire. So they put this all into some sort of calculator, and then out pops out a figure that says this is now what you're going to get as your pension. Now, in that particular scenario, there's no zakah due over the course of your life whilst that pension is going on, right? There's another discussion around, again, the halal and haram of that pension, but again, I'm not going to get into that. But the thing is that, why is that the case? Why is that the case? Because at no point do you know what the value of the wealth is that you have, right? You don't know that. Like, you don't know at any point that this is how much I have, like there's a tribute to me. It's just going to be some sort of calculation that's going to come out at the end depending on a number of unpredictable and unknown factors, and therefore there's nothing due there, right? Which is different from actually the more common type of pension scheme. So this might be, they call it like a money purchase scheme, or what do you call it, a defined benefit scheme, or like a self-invested pension, where, for example, you actually are contributing a certain amount, maybe your employer is contributing a certain amount, but at regular intervals, on a quarterly interval, for example, or whatever it might be, there is a defined pot of money that is yours, right, in your name, such that if you were to stop contributing to it, right, until you retire, there still is a certain amount or certain figure of wealth that is if you like, attributable to you, that you own, that is in your name, regardless of where it came from. Okay, so even if your employer contributed, you contribute, it doesn't matter. It's like, for example, saying that, when it comes to my zakat date, well, I've got £10,000, but, £5,000 of it was gifted to me by whoever. Well, fine. It doesn't matter that it was gifted. Whether you came through, whether you earned it through your salary, or you earned it through your rental income, or it came as a gift, or it came as inheritance, like wherever it rained from, it doesn't make a difference, right? So you have it, you've got it, it's yours. So similarly speaking, when an employer puts in the pot, or you put in the pot, whoever puts in the pot is your pot. So some scholars mentioned that yes, you don't have direct access to that money, but that money is being invested on your behalf, in your name, to grow that money, right, as an asset for you, right, that is basically you. It is your wealth. I mean, everyone would say that is mine. That money is mine. I don't have access to it right now, but it is mine. It's being grown in my name, etc., etc. So then, what we would recommend, or what we recommend in this scenario, and the scholars that we work with, they recommend in this scenario, is that somebody should then pay zakah, but they have to look at what is the money is being invested in. So it's like what we talked about when we talk about long-term investments. We said, just as a reminder, we said if somebody buys £10,000 of shares for the long term, they have no intention to sell those shares. They don't pay zakah on the entire £10,000. They pay zakah on the proportion that they own in terms of zakatable assets, which typically as a rule of thumb, if somebody can't make that exact calculation, we recommend they to apply a 40% rule. Okay, 40% rule means this. It means whatever value you have, £10,000, take 40% of that, so £4,000, and pay zakah on that amount. So in that case, it would be 2.5% of 40%, which is basically 1% of the total. So instead of paying £250 of zakah on 10,000, you'll pay £100. And why are you paying that? You're paying that because that amount represents your ownership, your part ownership in the companies that the shares in which you hold the shares. Now, most of these pensions are invested in shares, so you could apply that principle. You could say, okay, I'm just going to take 1% of the total amount. It's like a long-term investment, and that will cover me, okay, for my proportionate ownership of the underlying assets within those companies, right? But there are some types of pension schemes, like I think there's some, again, I don't know all the details, but some pension schemes, there's like Sharia-compliant pension schemes that they in property and all sorts of other things. So in property, as we discussed, there isn't necessarily intrinsically zakat on property itself, depending on what is specifically happening with that. So some pension schemes, maybe there'll be very little zakat to pay at all, depending on what the underlying investment is. But some of them, there may be more to pay. So this is where it does become a little bit more complicated. But the principle, the original principle of ownership or not ownership, I think there is a strong argument to say that even if you can't access the money, but you are contributing and you know it is being invested on your behalf and it is subject to growth and it is likely to grow over the long term in your name, and you can define the specific quantity of wealth, then there is a good argument to say that that should be included as part of your zakat calculation. But if someone has a specific scenario that they want to discuss later, then inshallah you can discuss that, or you can give out details and you can talk about that specifically. Yes, there's something. Yeah.
So the nisab has been set by the Prophet of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 700 grams of this gold, 7.5 tole sona or 52 tole chandi. Urdu what they say no in Arabic.
Right. Yeah.
It was fixed. Just as also written on page number 4.
Yeah.
That 87.48 grams of gold or 612.36 grams of silver.
Yeah.
Whichever is equivalent to that should be paid as zakat.
Okay, right.
Yeah,
So
just listen to the total question. Huh?
Sorry.
So
Yeah.
I'm having 10 grams of gold.
Mm-hmm.
I have to pay the zakat for the 10 grams of gold. Listen to me. Yeah? Either I have to reduce this 8.748 grams of gold, or the total from 0 to 10 grams of gold I should pay.
Okay, I understand. First of all, it's not 8.7, it's 87.
Okay.
87. So if you've got 100 grams,
100 grams.
you pay on 100 grams.
Say 100.
I understand the question. So you're basically asking, do you subtract the nisab? Yeah, and the answer is you don't subtract the nisab. Yeah? If you have money equal to or above the nisab, you pay on whatever you have, total. You don't subtract the nisab. It's a common question. It's a good question. So some people think, and it's an easy thing to think that, okay, if I'm above, then I just pay on whatever is above amount. But no, that's simply a marker. If you're above the marker, you pay on everything you have. If you're below the marker, you don't pay at all.
So that's another. If a person having 87 grams of gold, he need not pay. Here it is given, no. 87 grams, 87.47 grams of gold,
yeah,
which is equal to the nisab.
Yeah, that's the nisab.
So the person having 87 only, he should not pay the gold.
Yeah,
so if a person is possessing 100 grams of gold, what I told you, no?
Yeah, 100 grams a day. They pay on
You
all
have
of
to
it.
pay from 0 to 100 grams.
Yes,
There is no reduction in the amount what has been
That's right.
stipulated.
that's right.
Okay?
Yeah,
You should pay the total amount only,
that's right.
but not, it should not be deducted.
Yeah, that's correct.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, Jazakallah khair. But just in that, just want to mention one thing in that. Just in terms of this figure, obviously has been a process when scholars have looked at what the Prophet ﷺ described, and then they've taken that and then they've interpreted some gram value. There is a slight difference in also what some of the scholars mentioned. The main figures that I've seen, although actually more recently I heard some other slightly different figures as well. But the lowest figure I think that you'll see anywhere in gram value, in gram terms for gold is 85. So some scholars they say 85. So you another thing they say 85 and 595. I think this is quite a common one as well. Okay, most of the these figures here, most of the Hanafi scholars. I mean, the differences are very minimal. The point is actually because I just wanted to touch on your situation where you said if somebody has 87 grams, right? I mean, you know, better to play safe is what I'm saying, all right? And maybe, you know, use 85 as an absolute, you know, maybe a bottom line. So below 85, then it's just a different, you know, different situation. But the other thing to mention, to understand clearly, is this: is that remember, we've got to take the overall situation, right? Add your cash, your gold, your business assets, money owed to you. Take it all into account first. Compare it all to the nisab. Don't take your gold, compare your gold to the nisab, and then your cash separately and compare that to some other nisab. You know, do you understand what I'm trying to say? You're trying to look at your entire wealth as one, right? That is all your money / wealth, and then some of the possibly liabilities or debts as we discussed, and then you compare that to the nisab. Now, if somebody has only gold, as we said, if they only have gold, no cash, they're in overdraft and they've got nothing else whatsoever, okay, now they're just comparing, you know, weights, right? And that's it, right? But apart from that situation, then you should look at the overall situation first and compare it to the values that we've given here.
So regarding the pension, what you told, I was asked another question, no? So I was an employee in the government assets. I got retired, and the assets of the pension what I get is equivalent to sufficient for the livelihood of my being. Then how that zakat can be calculated from that?
Okay, so if somebody now is receiving pension,
Yeah.
then it's just like any other income.
No other income.
No. I'm just saying they treat it like any other income. Then they treat it like cash. So when you come to your zakat anniversary, any cash that you have saved, it's just cash. Now, as I said, whether that cash came from pension or from benefits or from your rental income or from salaried income or as a gift or as inheritance or wherever it came from, okay, it doesn't matter now. Okay, it's now just cash that you received. Yeah. So the source of it, when it comes to cash, it's very easy because the source is utterly irrelevant. Yeah, the source of the cash is utterly irrelevant unless one scenario, which is that you borrowed it. Okay, then you can deduct it, right? But apart from that, you know, it's yours now. The money is yours. So wherever it came from, it doesn't matter. So in terms of your current situation, if you're receiving pension income, then that's fine. You any cash that you have left over, right? You include that. You know, you include that. So the other thing to mention is that, see, with rental income or pension income, or whatever, what you don't say, okay, I'm getting £1,000 a month of rental income. So now when it comes to my zakat date, I take £12,000. No, you only take £12,000 if you haven't touched any of that over the course of the year. If you've saved it all, then fine, then you take 12,000 because you have 12,000. But if you spent it all, you spent it all, right? So it's actually, when it comes to cash, as I said, it's very easy. The cash you have, you pay. You don't have it, you don't pay. Okay, it's quite in that sense.
Thank you.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Any other questions? What about another question? I'll start asking questions now. Okay, what about paying zakat in advance? Can you pay zakat in advance? Yeah? No? Okay, we're not sure maybe. Okay, so the question is, so we said zakat, you said we should have a zakat date, an anniversary, right? So now what happens, for example, I typically pay zakat first of Ramadan. But now, let's say a few months prior to Ramadan, you know, there's a major flood somewhere, for example, right? And now we want to give to this cause. Okay, can we give zakat? Of course you can give zakat, right? So you can start to pay zakat over the course of the year, right? Over the course of the year, but you should pay that, if you're going to pay zakat in installments on a regular basis, or even spontaneously, but you're going to pay it in that way, you should pay it then in the context of the current year, if you like, yeah? So now, for example, let's say, okay, I gave £100 and I intended it, and that's actually a very important point which it must be mentioned. I intended it as zakat. That's really important. When you give zakat, you have to intend zakat. Yeah? So you can't, let's say for example now you come to your zakat calculation, you make your calculation, the figure you have to pay is £500, and then you remember, oh yeah, I remember actually, you know what, 3 months ago I went to this dinner, charity dinner, and I actually gave some money there. So I'm going to deduct that now from what I have to pay from zakat. The only situation in which you can do that is if at that time, when you gave it, at that time you intended it as zakat. Okay, you can't kind of do a back to the future and intend it in reverse. Yeah. So if you paid it and you weren't sure, you didn't have a clear intention, you just gave, like you just put money in the bucket, you just did this, and you didn't have a clear zakat intention, then it wasn't zakah basically. If you had a clear zakah intention and you spontaneously gave it in response to some sort of appeal or whatever, then that's fine. Then you paid £100 3 months ago and you intended it as zakah. Today you calculated your situation is £500 of zakah you have to pay, right? So now you can take off the 100 and pay 400. Yeah, you've got 400 left to pay, you pay. If you many of us, for example, what we do, we make our calculation and we round it up. Yeah, we add on a little bit more or extra. Again, it's quite important to do this. That's absolutely fine to do, of course, and it's a good thing to do to be completely sure, if you like, okay, that you've taken everything into account and to be safe. But again, you should intend the entire thing as zakat. So you say you calculated it worked out £433.22. Okay, so I'll round it up to 450 or to 500. Fine. Now intend the entire thing as zakat, and then you cover yourself as in zakat terms. Yeah. Yes, sir.
A group of people put into a pot every month, and one person takes out money, and everyone takes out pot up to the end of the year. So,
Committee.
yeah, basically that. How does that? How would the last person pay him the whole amount, or would he tell him the amount that he's put in?
Yeah. So I think in this situation, in effect, if let's put it this way, the zakat needs to be paid on that money, and then the people who are in the committee, right, need to make sure that it's paid. That's basically it. Yeah? Do you understand what I'm saying? So typically that's some sort of proportionate payment, okay, across the people within that, because everyone. Obviously, I think maybe they're slightly different exactly how they work in terms and conditions of different ones, right? But in effect, if in theory, the money there is basically then distributable back at some point. In theory, they could all come together and say, 12 of us, you know what, we just want all our bits back, basically, and everyone can take their money out again. Then effectively, as long as it proportionately is paid. So this raises another question to some degree. Okay, what happens if one person says, you know what, everybody, I will pay zakah on the entire amount for all of you? Is that okay or not? Is that okay? Or not okay?
Okay.
It's okay? Alright, why is it okay?
You're asking permission from the others. So if they say okay,
then it's fine. Okay. So it's very similar. So then we can ask a different question. So if a wife comes to the husband and says, "Husband, I have £20,000 of gold, okay, and zakat is to be paid on it," and he's so nervous about the situation. Okay. So the wife comes to the husband and says, "I have £20,000 of gold." Okay, and says, now you need to pay zakat on it for me, please. Or maybe you won't even get the please, yeah? So what does can the husband pay or not pay?
So you're allowed to pay? So is he allowed to pay?
He is allowed to pay.
Yes. He has to pay anything.
He has to pay. If he wants to protect his marriage, he has to pay, yes. Islamically, he doesn't have to pay. Yeah? Islamically, he doesn't have to pay. But as we said, to keep the peace, you have to pay. So the point is that yes, sorry.
Wife's not working, and the gold you have saving worth £20,000.
Sure.
And husband is working, but he has to pay, because wife is a housewife.
Right. Okay.
So how can she pay? So although the gold is used by her.
Sure.
You understand me?
I understand. Yeah. Okay, so I'll explain. So the default position. Okay, so let's do a couple of things to mention just to inshallah summarize this. First thing is, can someone pay zakat on behalf of someone else? Yes, they can. Yeah. So in that committee situation, if there's like the total in there is 10,000, and one person says, you know what, everybody, I will pay £250 on that for all of you, you're all covered, then no one else needs to worry about it. Yeah, zakat has been paid on it, but there should be that understanding. Everyone should know that this has taken place, so everyone is clear. So that's that one. Okay. The next one is that remember zakah, it's very important to understand, zakah is an individual obligation. Yeah? can someone pray my fajr for me, my dhuhr for me? It's slightly different because in zakah we said you can. But fundamentally, zakah is the obligation on the individual who owns the wealth. And if the fact is they own the wealth. Now, culturally speaking, we typically are in a mode where it is the done thing for the husband to pay the zakah on the wife's gold, and that is fine. It's fine to do. But if he cannot or does not want to, then he doesn't have to. There's absolutely no obligation on him whatsoever for him to pay the zakah. And in that situation, if a lady has £20,000 of gold, she should sell a little bit of gold, take it to the jeweler, sell some, and pay the zakah. And to be honest, in a way, it is a preferable thing to do almost. Why? Because we talked right at the beginning about the significance of zakah, about the purification aspect and all the rest of it. If forever it is the case that a person has all this wealth, but they themselves never pay zakah, themselves, it's like they're missing. To be honest, they're missing out in a way. I would say, yes, the deed is done, the box is ticked. No one is going to be, inshallah, questioned in that way. The liability is fulfilled. But there is something of, I should pay the zakah on my wealth. If I have the wealth, I should pay the zakah. And one of the wisdoms of zakah is also to encourage the circulation of wealth. Not to, actually the hoarding of wealth in that way, or the sitting of gold in the box in the attic, is a very, I think, uncomfortable thing to do from an Islamic perspective. It's not to say that we shouldn't save and we shouldn't keep thing aside. Yes, of course there is wisdom in that and there is sense in that to do. But it is also something where balance. I think is important to have. Balance is important to have in this situation, and to understand that fundamentally zakah is an individual obligation. And in certain scenarios, we've experienced situations where some brothers have actually got in touch and quite in a panic about the situation because their wife has a lot of gold. Maybe the man is not so wealthy. Maybe his wife's family is extremely wealthy, potentially in a situation, and she has a lot of gold, right? And he is relatively struggling. I mean, struggling on he's got a job or whatever, but on a month-to-month basis, he's just to the wire, just making ends meet. And now this big zakah bill lands, if you like, in every year. He said, "Look, I can't. It's really going to make things difficult, to be honest." Then, especially in those situations, then he preferable for her to sell some gold and pay zakah herself. And inshallah, there'll be blessing in that as well for her and her wealth.
And another thing, can you clarify for me something? Is it okay to say you calculated and you took out £1,000 worth of zakah to give to poor person or poor family or whatever, but can you say you don't pay that £1,000 all in one lump sum to that particular family is very poor and maybe they're relying on someone on zakah money? Is it okay to pay monthly over the years or just pay in one lump sum to that family? Because my understanding, my thinking is that if I pay in £1,000, they're going to use it anyway. But if I pay them monthly, they know the income is coming monthly, and they can
plan for the budget.
Budget. Are we allowed to do that?
Okay, so just to repeat the question for the sisters as well. So the question was, if somebody has £1,000 of zakah to give, can they give it over the course of months to an eligible relatives, for example, whoever it might be, or do they have to give it in one go because the fear is if they give it in one go, basically it'll disappear in one go, and you won't see it. So I think we apply the principle that we said before, which is that it is better, depending on the default position is better to give ASAP, because from your perspective you have a liability, a zakah liability to pay off. And if somebody is giving it monthly in that way, I think it's very important, because we always have, as Muslims who constantly, we fear the moment where the angel of death will come and take our soul. That's, we should always be conscious of that. So we should, if we are going to engage in such a situation where we are going to have the zakah being distributed over the course of time, and in that situation, Uncle, the maximum should be, as we said, 1 year. So if you have 1,000 to give, 10,000 to give, whatever it is, it should not exceed. Then by the time next Ramadan comes, it should have been, previous one should have been done. But let's say in that situation, if we're going to do that, people around us should know, or our inheritors should know, or whoever is executing our will should know. Because if something happens to us, at least then they are aware that this is happening, and therefore they can make sure that the zakah from that one, from the previous calculation that was due, is at least completed and fulfilled, on your behalf. So there's none of those issues, if you like, outstanding. any outstandings. Okay.
But do you have to tell the person that this is the zakat money?
No, so you don't have to tell the recipient it is zakat money. And in most situations it's better not to, because obviously of the sensitivity and the respect for that person and all the rest of it. However, you should have also the question comes up, what does somebody, because zakat is only accepted if it definitely goes to an eligible recipient.
That's right.
Right? So then the other issue comes up, which is quite a tricky issue, to be honest, around, really determining the eligibility. Because even sometimes, even back home, if you like, in certain situations, again, the gold kind of thing comes in. There might be relatives or family or whatever who are living in a difficult situation, but they have some gold, sitting there, again, stored away, if you like, which technically might actually even make them zakat payers, technically speaking, right? Because if you look at their overall situation, that asset is there. But then we, from our perspective, living here, think, all right, they're in difficulty, struggling, whatever, and then we give. So the question arises: how much does the zakat payer inquire into the situation of a recipient? And here, obviously, again, it's a sensitive. So it's the attitude or the principle we should apply is one of at least more than 50% certainty, right? At least we feel sufficiently sure that they really are in a difficult and struggling situation. Then we should give. If we feel uncertain about that, but we feel we still want to help, then it's better to help with sadaqah towards an uncertain situation and put your zakah somewhere where you know that the eligible recipient is worthy of zakah. So that's also something to bear in mind. Any last questions?
Coming back to business, so whatever stock you got to pay zakat on that stock.
Okay, yeah. So the brother asking, coming back to business and the issue of paying zakat on stock. Zakat is payable on stock. So, but remember, what we said is that zakat is payable on stock according to the value that you attribute to that stock. Yeah, meaning that somebody whose stock they've got out for sale, basically, right? Then obviously whatever their sale price is, they've got the price tag on. They've got the price tag on the items that they're going to sell. Then that price tag is what you would use for your calculation, because that's where you expect to sell it. Let's say, for example, you've got something there which is like you've had it there for a year, so let's not sell it. You've got in the back, you've got a pile of dead stock, really, right? It's not really kind of shifting, going anywhere, no one wants it, whatever. Then you would still value it, but you value it at what price would you accept for somebody to take it off you today? Right? So you ask, okay, if somebody came to me today and they offered me £100, £200, whatever, for this, would I give them to them for that? Yeah, fine, I would. So they would have it for that, and you would value it at that level. Do you understand? So I think, because think about it, all of your stock is basically cash waiting to happen, isn't it? So basically, it's as if you basically make an assumption for, okay, if I was to liquidate everything right now, we're at an appropriate level, what would it all turn into in cash terms? And then that becomes is a subject to zakat then.
Excuse me.
Yes.
You include the stock whereby the stock is on credit and you haven't paid for that goods and you've got that, and you probably pay in 3 months or 4 months, whatever the credit you get. Are you entitled to pay for that goods as well?
Okay, yes, good question, right? So if we again apply the principles that we discussed. So on the one hand you have stock.
Yeah.
So you should put the stock into the column of your assets at where you expect to sell them. But on the other hand, you effectively have a liability. You have a liability of the money that you will owe, right, to pay for that. And that is a current liability. So you can deduct that. So on the one hand, you will have your stock, your value there. But remember, obviously, you might have bought the stock for, let's say, 100. But you might intend to sell the stock for 200. So in your asset side, you're going to put 200. In your liability side, you're going to put 100. That's what you're going to owe that you paid for the stock. So you will pay zakat effectively on the difference between the two.
So in conjunction of this question,
yes.
What our brother told in the earlier question, that suppose there is a family who's the head of the family got some injured and is unable to work or earn for their bread for their family.
Yes.
But I know that I have paid the zakat by this Ramzan. Everything is over. At the time, for next month, as it comes, those poor are being suffering a lot of livelihood of the bread.
Yeah.
Can we start giving this zakat like that, or only sadaqah can be given?
Yeah, so, okay, fine. So if I understand the question correctly, you're saying that you've given the zakah for 1 year, the zakah is done, and then the next month, so let's say, for example, 2 weeks after Eid this year, you paid your zakah in Ramadan, 2 weeks after Eid, you realize that, okay, another family member is struggling, or you want to help them, etc. Yes, as we said, you can start to give zakah, and then you can count towards your zakah that's due for next year, right? So now, if you start to give, let's say, the equivalent of £100 a month, for example, okay, over the course starting from, let's say, August this year, or Shawwal, okay, you start to give £100 a month, and then by the time next Ramadan comes along, okay, you're making your calculation again, and let's say by then you've given £1,200 already. Now you make your calculation, and you calculate 1,500 is your zakah due. So your difference is now 300, right? So you just only need to pay 300. If you make your calculation, and actually in reality your calculation ends up being less than the amount that you've already paid, then you have nothing more to pay. In fact, you have overpaid. But that's fine. No refunds. Okay. One brief thing I'll mention, which is a nice sort of piece of knowledge around zakah, which not many people they know. So 2 things. One is that zakah is not just 2.5%. Yeah, zakah is not just 2.5%. Zakah rates actually are also 5% and 10% and 20%. But the 5% and 10% and 20% are on items that are subject to zakah that most of us don't have. So 5% and 10%, for example, is on crops, right? And 20% is on minerals and ores underground. And the 5 and 10% on crops, it depends on whether the crops have been naturally irrigated or they have been mechanically irrigated or manually irrigated. So if the crops have been manually irrigated, like a farmer or whatever has kind of put time into irrigating the crops, then zakah is 5%. But if it's naturally irrigated, zakah is 10%. And then for the minerals and ores underground, it's 20%. So the scholars mention the wisdom behind this, and it's a nice reflection, alhamdulillah, which is to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala imposes the least zakah on the wealth that we have for which we made the most effort, and imposes the most zakah on the wealth that we have for which we made the least effort. So if you like, the cash and the business assets and the stuff that we earn and we toil for, and whatever, right, that we do to acquire, okay, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says 2.5%, okay, 1 part of every 40. Okay, the crops that the farmer made an effort around, okay, made more of an effort with by irrigating, tending to and caring for and all the rest of it, he pays 5%. Okay, and zakah on crops is due immediately as the crops harvest. So they don't follow this cycle that we talked about, right? Crops, as soon as they harvest, then it's payable straight. Okay, so that's 5%. If they're naturally irrigated, then 10%, i.e. the farmer just sat back and watched his orchard grow, okay, then he'll pay 10%. Okay, and for the stuff underground, well, none of us can claim too much credit for that. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, okay, that's 20% on those things. But just to give you a perspective of zakah as a system. So in a Muslim country where all of these, the entire economy, when zakah is being paid on the entire amounts of everything that is there, then that's what would apply. Yes, brother. So.
Sorry, based on what you just said, we've got like this back home, back in Africa, where we mine sand, like sand for building. Is that 20% then?
So say again?
Like back home in Africa, we've got like a mine.
A mine, okay.
Where they take sand, stones and things like
that.
Okay. Is that 10% or 20%?
Okay. That's a very specific. I'm not an expert on this issue, to be honest. So I'm not even going to try and pretend to start answering the question, just because no one has ever come to me and asked me before, to be honest. So I never bothered looking into it. But if there is a specific situation, inshallah we can get it looked into. We can contact the scholars that we work with, inshallah, look at the specific situation. If you have a part ownership, in something like this, or some situation like this, then we can look into it, inshallah. Alright, I think inshallah we'll take a pause here, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for all of you for attending. As I mentioned, there's a few more zakah calculation guides here, inshallah, so please take one as you go. And also, when you leave, inshallah... Okay, yeah, sure. Please, you can also visit our website. It's www.nzf.org.uk, where you can find more material and information around zakat, and also National Zakat Foundation as well. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallah bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.